Hey everyone, I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today. We're excited to bring you another in our series of interviews with top leaders in health IT. And our guest is Dr. Shiv Rao. He's CEO and co-founder of Abridge. Welcome, Shiv.
Thank you so much, Sean. It's a privilege to be here.
Yeah, excited for this discussion. It's our ongoing series of ambient clinical solutions. Excited to learn more about Abridge. So tell us about yourself and Abridge.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the founder and CEO of Abridge. Started the company in 2018. A little bit about me. Prior to this, I was an EVP at a really large health system called UPMC. I was actually on the corporate VC side of UPMC. I got to invest for provider-facing solutions that could help doctors or nurses in hospitals or clinics. It was a privilege. I also got to deploy capital into Carnegie Mellon University. We started a machine learning and health program there. And I mentioned that because, in this new world that I'm in with Abridge, we have this incredible free-flowing pipeline of just world-class people, talent that comes from Carnegie Mellon to this day now into Abridge. Now, a lifetime ago, I went to Carnegie Mellon, but in the middle, like became a cardiologist. And now I say that with an asterisk. So about once a month, I see patients. I sign up for the weekend shift nobody else wants. And it's a privilege. I get to stay close to the mission of the company. But also, selfishly, I get to use Abridge myself and bring those insights back to the team.
That's awesome. So talk to us about what is the story behind Bridge's ambient clinical voice solution? How did it come together? What's the story of kind of the company?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say that for us, everything starts with this thesis that when you think about it, healthcare is about people. And what are they doing? They're having conversations. So whether it's doctors or nurses, whether it's with patients or family members, they're having conversations and they're happening like this over video. They're also happening over the phone. They're always going to happen in person as well. And so what our technology does is it structures and summarizes those conversations to solve problems. And when you think about 2023, the problem that's top of mind for so many of us is clinician burnout, it's staffing shortages, and so much of that clerical work we can certainly take off the table immediately with this generative AI-based solution that we've got. But in terms of that thesis, you think about it, these conversations are upstream not just of documentation. Conversations are upstream of certainly, nodes, but also coding, that can work for billing and rev cycle, that could work for HCCs and risk adjustment. They're upstream of clinical trials, upstream of experiences, and ultimately even upstream of outcomes. And so when we think to summarize these conversations, certainly I think our first priority always is going to be the end users. How do we help the doctors and the nurses and also the patients and the family members better understand, follow through on everything that they talked about? But the sky's the limit in terms of where we can go and where we've already been.
That's awesome. So talk to us about how your solution compares to things, like I said, this is a series of we've done I could list off the long list: Suki, Nabla, OnPoint, Healthcare Partners, Abridge, Augmedix, AWS HealthScribe, Nuance, Copilot, Ambient. Anyway, I won't bore everyone, but where do you fit in and how do you think your solution compares to, what's becoming quite frankly a crowded space?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's exciting that there are so many players that are focused on that one aspect of what this kind of technology can do in healthcare, the note piece. And I think a part of the reason is because the floor is higher than ever before. And by that, I mean that there are so many AI primitives, if you will, AI kind of technologies that you can use off the shelf in some way, shape, or form, and as an API, for example. And you can use those technologies in conjunction with other off-the-shelf technologies, and you can start to stitch together a compelling solution that at the very least maybe could create a really interesting demo. And that's something that didn't exist in even like a couple of years ago, and is really emergent, I think, in terms of what's going on in this whole world of generative AI right now. And that's great. I think from our perspective, the higher the floor, the better, because I think we'll be able to get this technology out there in some way, shape, or form into more people's hands. That said, I think where Bridge is different and where we've had a very different point of view is that we're just as much AI native as we are healthcare native. And by that, I mean, I'm a clinician, I'm an MD, I'm practicing, and I'm the CEO. And also our chief clinical officer is Tina Shah. She used to be at the White House working for the Surgeon General on clinician burnout strategy for the government, and then used to work on that for the VA hospital system. She's a practicing pulmonologist. And there's any number of other clinicians who are in the company working on different aspects of our solution. And at the same time, who are we working with? We're working with some of the brightest minds, some like the most world-class thinkers in all things AI. For example, our chief technology and science officer, Zach Lipton, He is a professor at Carnegie Mellon, he used to be at AWS AI. And, he's an incredibly, important person in this world of generative AI and AI in general. And he's been able to recruit other incredibly world-class thinkers, like, say, Davis Liang out of Meta AI, and any number of others out of the top commercial labs and also academic labs, to sort of push the same rock up the hill with us. Go after this mission of helping people, helping clinicians, helping unburden them from all the clerical work that's crushing our souls at night, and helping bring them closer together with the patients that they're serving. So I think that is what's very different, because while the floor is higher, when you've got those two ingredients, the ceiling isn't low. Otherwise, your ceiling is pretty low. Maybe you're sort of you're building a solution that can maybe work for a whole bunch of clinicians out there, but the ability to land and expand against that thesis that we're operating against, and help with all the things that happen even before the note and also after, like, that's where you're sort of hamstrung a little bit. And that's something, given the scope of our ambitions and our vision, we've always seen it to be critical to have those two ingredients in place. So how does that manifest? It manifests in really, really deep EMR integration, first and foremost. And for me, selfishly speaking, that's critical. I can use Abridge, within, my medical record system. And I'm able to hit start, hit stop, swivel my chair, and my note is there. And it's been able to integrate with my dot phrases, for example, that I've invested in any number of years into. Using Epic at my health system, and I know that there's any number of other clinicians who similarly have really deep workflows that work for them inside the medical record. So the last thing we want to do is ask them to declare sunk cost fallacy on those workflows, or ask them to necessarily have to copy and paste notes into any number of different discrete fields, because it's not just about the note. It's deep integrations. It's being mindful of what that workflow looks like that really starts to differentiate this, because it's not just notes, really. When you're thinking about the bigger picture, it's also about orders. It's about coding. It's about being able to summarize the chart. It's about all those other things. I think another really important aspect of having a deep science bench and team here is being able to meet all the patients wherever they are, and all the clinicians too. So we're live with over 55 specialties. At Emory, for example, we're live with over 22 specialties. These are technologies multilingual. Just last week, people used it in Mandarin, like a couple of weeks ago, in an entirely Japanese conversation. Certainly, what we have a better sense of from a benchmarking perspective, which is important to us, is that it works in full Spanish conversations. Again, whether or not you have an interpreter or not, when you hit stop, swivel your chair, your note is there. But I'd say beyond a lot of the features I've sort of described to you, I'd say the most important aspect of any technology that is centered on generative AI is trust. And for us, trust is some combination of transparency, reliability, and credibility. And when we think about transparency, reliability, and credibility, we sort of parse it in different ways across our stack. And for transparency, for example, one of the features that we've got in our solution allows you to understand where any generated summary came from. You can highlight a word, a fragment, an entire paragraph, and the technology will show you where the evidence came from. You can even listen to it if audio is enabled. And that sort of auditability unlocks any number of other value propositions, by the way, but what it also creates is trust. Because if these technologies happen to, as we call it, hallucinate, maybe even 5% of the time or 10% of the time, in healthcare, we don't think that's acceptable. And so not only do we develop solutions like this, but we publish on them. We've published more peer-reviewed computer science papers on how do you use this type of technology, this transformer-based technology in healthcare than any other entity. And so hopefully that gives you a sense of this is, to us, this is like a different sort of space than just narrowly sort of thinking about it as like an AI scribe per se. Our ambitions are a lot bigger, and certainly we can wedge right in and help with those workflows, but where we can go and where we already are is a lot more expansive.
Sure. No, that's interesting, and I want to dive into a few things that you said. Although I'm struck a little bit that when you talk about the soul-crushing burden of documentation, that sounded like someone that soul had been crushed a little bit, maybe the way you said it. So let's talk about how you help with that, right? You talk to us. What does the workflow look like for a clinician? You talked about the Epic workflow. Is that the common one? Are there other options available? It sounds like there's one embedded in Epic to be able to just record. Is that on your phone? Is it a desktop? Talk to us about the workflow for a clinician.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can invoke Abridge from inside Haiku, for example. You can hit start, hit stop. Haiku is the mobile Epic
Right.
application, and things will show up, inside of Epic. But it also integrates very deeply with all of those dot phrases, with all the other sort of discrete fields inside of Epic, and we have a really exciting sort of roadmap in terms of how much further we can go together. Now, at the same time, we're certainly not exclusive, and there are other ways to integrate with other EMRs as well. And certainly, there's also the approach that any number of those companies that you mentioned are maybe focused on, which is maybe copying and pasting, writing it right into the medical record as well. I think that what that goes to show, though, is the floor is really higher. Like the ability to create some value with an off-the-shelf API is there.
Mhm.
I think that it's just a question of what you need. And if you're looking for something a bit more, I think, a bit more expansive in terms of what it can do today and how deeply integrated it can be and where it can go, then you might prioritize for different features a little bit more differently. But certainly your comment about, soul crushing, absolutely. I mean, even my dad retired as a doctor because he couldn't type fast enough. He just couldn't, he never learned how to type, and he never really learned how to figure out dictation technologies either himself. But for me too, I mean, I'm much younger, obviously, and I'm probably the worst nightmare of any like clinical administrator, where I'd get my notes done late, probably more than 3 days late, and then you can't bill for them, or I didn't go to the drop down menus and pick the right diagnoses, or I always picked the most non-specific one, like chest pain not otherwise specified. Like I can be the bane of their existence, obviously. And so finding a way to build something that, selfishly works for me and allows me to feel like I'm done even before I leave the room, and that I've done really good work. And most importantly, that I've given my patient the best possible care and experience. That's absolutely my selfish goal.
Interesting. So talk to us about how much of this is automated with technology versus humans in the background. And obviously this question comes since, many of them have scribes in the background verifying. What's Abridge's approach to the human versus technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've never had any sort of humans doing any aspect of the work.
Right. And we always say
The
that with the caveat, the doctor's reviewing the note, but
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the most important thing, is that the only human in the loop is the clinician. It's the person who needs to review these notes or review anything else that we do, whether it's a diagnosis that we're pulling out or an order that we're pulling out. We always want the clinician to trust and verify what they're seeing before it's submitted. And so that, I think, trust and that ability to use those tools like I described to you, where you can audit, where you can very quickly check. We had a doctor at Brown University recently who emailed us saying like, hey, you wrote, the technology wrote that my patient had a hip replacement. And then when we looked into it, we saw that actually it did come up. And he just didn't hear it. Like, we're all fallible as people, as human beings, whether it's on the patient side of the room or the clinician side of the room. And certainly I know when I'm in front of my patient, prior to this technology, I might be chicken scratching on a piece of paper the whole time. And so you might not catch all the details, but his ability to sort of trust and verify and see that it actually did come when we asked him to check it out himself, and like see that it was in the conversation, he just didn't catch it, I think demonstrates what this technology can do. It can give us perfect memory. It can help us create the most complete notes, which at the end of the day will improve quality of care.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, doctors are humans. So it's everyone is the clinicians are. So, you talked a little bit about the integration with Epic into Haiku. Tell us about any other integrations. Do you integrate with other EHRs, or what's on the roadmap there?
Yeah, we have this incredible like privilege that we were the first startup that Epic has announced partnering with. They have this new Partners and Pals program that we
Yep.
we live inside, and so it's an incredible privilege that we are just so grateful for, because it's a creative privilege. The idea is that we can actually, among other things, we can sort of be in a lab together in a sense, conceptually, like we can start to think about what's next. We can start to brainstorm and come up with new workflows and test them before they're ready, even for like the broader market. And so that opportunity we absolutely think is so exciting, especially in relation to this kind of an emerging technology around generative AI, where I think none of us really know exactly where and how, like what are all the spots. I think our imaginations are going wild right now that you could apply it to everything, but we do need to deploy things. We do need to test them. We do need to benchmark things. We do need to have that rigor, that we've had in the company of publishing, peer-reviewed papers before we can really say things with utmost confidence that this is truly healthcare grade for all the different use cases. So that's a really exciting opportunity. But it does work with all EHRs. There's no question about it. Our technology is EMR agnostic, and we can integrate via the standard protocols that are out there, or in some EMRs cases via the public APIs that they've exposed, or the new sorts of, in some cases, private APIs that people are building. So it's exciting. I think everyone's recognizing, to a conversation I think we had at some point, that this is not an if anymore. Like this is absolutely a when for this entire space. Like AI is here, and there's no question that the majority, I think, of clinicians out there are going to be using AI, this kind of AI, in some way, shape, or form in the next couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, they're going to have to give up those templates and all those clicks for something, right?
Well, yeah,
they'll be happy to give them
yeah,
up.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important that we sort of don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because so many, I mean, don't tell me to give up my templates. Like I've invested a lot into those over the years. And you need that sort of integration between this technology and those templates to be able to create the output that we know we need to put into the medical record, not just for clinical communication, but also for billing and revenue cycle and all those downstream workflows.
Definitely. So talk to us about the clinician. Does the clinician have to change the way they're talking in the exam room, to make this work? It's interesting. Did you have to change? But what are you hearing from your users, kind of the training process and what they need to learn?
People don't need to change anything. In fact, we always sort of we try to make this as lightweight as possible from an onboarding perspective. We want people to just have a very honest and almost like clean slate first experience with the technology. And a great story that I have is Greg Ader, the Chief Medical Information Officer at University of Kansas Health System. When he first used this, he's an ENT clinician. And when he first used this on the first day, he told us Abridge had generated a perfect note. He didn't make a single edit to the note by Abridge. And he told us it was like incredible. I think his quote was, "This is like, it seems like the most important thing since the stethoscope, practically, this technology." But then over the course of the week, he told us it was getting better and better and better and better. It was even improving further in terms of being able to kind of like reshape itself into the type of format that he would expect, kind of getting a sense of his preferences and so on. And so it should work. It should absolutely create value on the first day. And there isn't anything that you necessarily need to adjust. But what I've noticed in myself, and what I've also seen seen from other folks or heard from other folks, is that you do end up communicating a little bit differently with your patient. And you end up communicating, in my head, the way I was taught to communicate with patients in third year of medical school. I remember there was a class called motivational interviewing. And these expert clinician history takers would sit down with us and coach us up on how to take the perfect history and how to be really transparently, radically transparent about what the next steps are, and make sure that the patient is registering what the care plan is, do shared decision making, make sure that they feel like their fingerprints are on this, that this is really ultimately about them, all these different tips and tricks. And I think that's what this technology brings us back to, the ideal sort of history taking, motivational interviewing sort of like experience. And that comes out in the way people speak more clearly, the way that people tend to translate more for their patients. They just take a beat longer to go through the next steps. And they're doing it for multiple reasons. But certainly now knowing that when they do that, when they're explicit about everything they're thinking and wanting to be in the note, that it's not only going to create a more complete note for them, but they're improving their patient's experience. And that's always incredibly exciting to see, because so much of the name of our company even is about building that bridge between both sides. We can even create notes for patients as well to help them better understand and follow through. So it's always music to our ears when we hear that it's working out that way.
Yeah. Well, how do you approach accuracy of your solution? This is a question I've asked a lot of in this space, and kind of is like, how do you measure accuracy? You talked about the perfect note. That's interesting, right? That he said that. But how do you look at it across your whole user base when it comes to accuracy?
Yeah. And at a high level, an interesting metric is that we're automating well over 91, 92% of the note. And so when you look at the amount, this is across all of our clinicians, across all of our specialties. So there's any number of people like Dr. Ader who are getting perfect notes quite often and not having to do any edits. But on average, what we're seeing is over 92% or 91, 92% is generated by Abridge's AI, and then the clinician is making some kind of last mile edits that get them to the end zone with the note that they're happy to sort of submit into the final medical record. And we also know that that's not the only way to measure accuracy, because how is that necessarily actionable? Certainly we get all the edits back, and we're also able to train our models based on the diffs that we get, the sort of delta between what the clinician does and what the AI does, or AI generated. But given that we've got this like pipeline of machine learning modules that create the final note, we measure accuracy in a much more granular way. That gives us much more control. So we sort of talked about this idea earlier of like the floor being higher. And the way that I see venture capitalists talk about this phenomenon this year is they say that there's AI enabled companies, and then there's AI first companies. And AI enabled companies are sort of those companies that they're rightfully taking advantage of the higher floor and using like an API, for example, maybe like a Palm 2 or a GPT or some other API to sort of approximate a clinical note that can be pretty valuable for a clinician. And then over time, I assume that they would probably want to start to build their own modules that give us them more control on the output, so that they can give the same experience we're giving University of Kansas that I described, where Dr. Ader said it was improving every single day of the week. But that's a very different approach when you're AI enabled. You don't have that control. You don't have that agency as much. And so you're sort of hoping, and you're kind of like, prompt engineering and iterating on those sorts of tactics, maybe without a lot of metrics. And that can work to an extent, but we believe, especially in healthcare, that it is incredibly valuable to have control here. So the first step of our pipeline, we have our own speech recognition module or system. We call it EARS, and it's multilingual, and it'll make sense of every word that I say and a patient says, and it'll still sort of transcribe them. And what that does for us is it gives us control. We'll announce some partnerships soon for large health systems that deal with very complicated patients in sort of a medicalese that is not well understood by any off-the-shelf speech recognition system out there. But we're outperforming now all of them because of these partnerships where we've been able to iterate and improve our speech recognition technology. And we can do that, in the blink of an eye. Like on a daily basis, we can train it to recognize new words and be better at new languages. But beyond speech recognition, there's all the NLP. And for us, it's not just about sort of a large language model summarizing something. We also have a classifier, for example, and a machine learning classifier for us is it's not as, it's sort of deciding what kind of information was this, and it's slotting it in different parts of the note. Then we also structure the information, and we map that information, for example, to ontologies in healthcare. So you think about UMLS and SNOMED or RxNorm or LOINC or all the others. And we're mapping things. That's what unlocks all those workflows that are beyond the note. That's what makes this enterprise grade within like for a deep EMR integration, like the one that we have live, with Epic, for example. But even beyond that, there's the summarization piece. And I think that accuracy question is so fascinating in relation to summarization, because there is a lot of personal preference in what goes in a note, and it's hard to parse that. And so what becomes more valuable in some ways, and initially, is to think about completeness, like recall. Are we capturing all the information that the clinician needs to put in the note, and that maybe someone else in the workflow, like a revenue cycle person, needs to see, needs to validate was there? So suffice to say, I'm probably starting to bore you, but like for all these different modules, we have metrics, and we're always like following them and ensuring that they're going in the right direction. And it's a boon, you know, for as a clinician, as the clinician leader of the company, it's an incredible boon for us because we can kind of look at a number and recognize that it's improving, as opposed to if we were simply AI enabled, we'd be kind of flying blind here, hoping that we could recruit the people or spend years kind of creating annotated data sets to be able to start to benchmark our own technologies. But that's the unfair advantage we have in having started in 2018.
Interesting. And we're only health IT nerds that watch and listen to this, so we never get bored with this stuff. Talk to us. You know, you've mentioned it a few elements of this, but how does your product work across every specialty? Are there certain ones that are better than others? Does it work for every specialty? You know, you mentioned you know, being active in a number, you know, but talk to us about your approach to specialty. It sounds like the goal is for it to work eventually for every specialty.
Well, not every specialty needs this technology, and I think like we should acknowledge that off the bat. For example, like a pathologist who's not having a lot of dialogue with the patient doesn't need this, you know. And a radiologist needs a different type of voice technology that involves more dictation. So that's the type that I grew up on when I started practicing about a decade ago, where I would pick up a dictaphone and start saying, you know, 25-year-old female with a past medical history of diabetes and hypertension, next line, capital P, past medical history, next line, dash, hypertension, next line, dash. So like that sort of punctuation, that sort of, it's almost like a ritual that we would go through every day after a clinic. It's just dictate after dictate after dictate. That, you know, those workflows, in large part, you know, we aren't necessary anymore with our technology. You can just have a conversation. But for certain specialties who never had a conversation in the first place, who were always just having monologues, looking at images and monologuing, then you'll still need a voice technology, and we can also like help with this, that will capture, you know, what the words that you said. So it's a slightly different flavor of voice technology, and it's not like this sort of generative type of technology that we leverage for medical conversations. Now, that said, anybody who's having dialogue, that's who we can help. And that's who we've got a lot of conviction that we can work for. For some folks who are having deep dialogues, let's say ophthalmologists, and they're using Epic, there's a very specific module inside of Epic called Kaleidoscope that you need to integrate with. Like, you know, there is always like these details way beyond like an interesting demo is all the details. Like that's where I think the true enterprise value is created, is like, how do you get into all these discrete fields and create a really seamless experience? And that's what we're all about, is going across all the specialties and creating those seamless experiences, those integrations, making this feel like good air conditioning where you're not even aware of it. Like the data is just flowing in if it's tuned the right way. So, you know, at Emory, we're live across over 22. In general, we're live across over 55. Certainly, when we think about who needs this technology the most, we think about primary care and internal medicine. But that doesn't preclude us from working with, you know, anybody out there. And certainly, we've seen in the data that this works across any number of different folks. But I got an incredibly exciting and inspiring text message from Alistair Erskine at Emory just a couple of weeks ago, and I'm pretty sure we have this on our website now as well. But he texted me, and he said that, hey, like we're at over 500 doctors, and this is Alistair. He said, I'm getting love letters from clinicians telling me that this has saved their practice, their marriage, and their mental health. And it's the most profound quote. I mean, it was absolutely, it'll always probably be bulletin board material for everyone in the company who's joining this, really for the mission of creating something that really feels like it's for clinicians, by clinicians, using the best science. And you know, in his case, these 500 plus doctors, you know, to your question, they're across, you know, any number, over 22 specialties, and they're still giving him that feedback.
Yeah, I don't remember those messages coming when we implemented EMR. It was mostly hate mail, but yeah, I think it is the excitement of this technology, right? So I appreciate you taking time to share the, about it. As I end all of these, people are always going to say, "Well, how do I get a demo? Where can people go to learn more about Abridge?"
Yeah, absolutely. If they go to abridge.com, there's a way to sort of sign up for a quick demo. There are certainly demos that are probably floating around on YouTube that people can check out as well. You can find us on in addition to our website, but certainly on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. And you can DM us. And I can share my email. I'm shiv@abridge.com. And certainly anyone out there, I want to talk to. What I do on a daily basis is I spend time with our clinicians, and we've got clinicians not just inside the company, but we've got all the clinicians and the clinician leaders at healthcare institutions. And what we're all about really is making sure that that ethos that is always going to permeate through all of the technology that we create now, no matter how sort of bleeding edge it is, that this is something that is built with purpose in mind and built with the clinical workflow in mind. So be a privilege to hear from more folks, and would be incredibly thrilled to get our technology in more people's hands as well.
Awesome. Well, Shiv, I appreciate you taking time to share about Abridge and all the work you're doing. And thanks everyone for watching and listening. If you want to find more great healthcare IT content like this, be sure to check it out at healthcareittoday.com or search for Healthcare IT Today on your favorite podcasting applications. Thanks, Shiv.
Thank you so much, John.